Welcome everyone to another NASCAR Heat Evolution video. In this video, I'm going to focus on my overall first look and review of the game as I see it at this particular point. According to Steam, I've now logged about 6 hours in the game doing various things from career mode to practice sessions and so forth. So I want to give you guys an idea of what I see in the game. One thing I'll not be referring to very much at all in this video is the real trouble that people are having with wheels not working, pedals not working, assigning controls and all that. I addressed that in a different video, and honestly, it's just not good at all. But I don't want to spend an entire video going over that. We all know that there's a lot more communication that needs to be had there, a lot more explanation on that particular subject. So what I want to focus on in this particular video, as I'm going to join a race session, and as you can see, you can join as whichever driver you want. I'm just going to choose Casey Mears because I like the number 13. And I'm going to choose Atlanta because it is a wide open type 1.5 mile track. So I'll be doing some driving during the video. I'll also be doing some where we just sit here in the pits and we discuss various things. All right, let's start with the options you see here on the practice screen. All right, the practice screen, if you notice on the right-hand side of the screen, it says Atlanta Motor Speedway practice session, and then right below that it says setup default. Now, if you use that setup, which I would highly recommend for beginners, it is unbelievably tight. This thing will need a 10-acre field to turn in. So that's to be expected. You know, from a game like this, you would expect that a default setup would be on the tighter side. So the first thing you're going to want to do, if you are more experienced with these types of things, you're going to want to change this to a custom setup. Now, it gives you the option for a custom race or custom qualify, and that's it. This is one of the first things I want to point out. Number one, this is track specific. Okay, so whatever setup I might work hard on here, let's say I spend a lot of time on my Atlanta setup and I want to use that as a baseline for other tracks that we go to, maybe Texas or Chicago and Kansas and so on. Well, you're going to have to write it down on pen and paper because there's no way that I know of to share setups between tracks. So let's take a look at the various race settings. Okay, we're going to go into the garage. You've got shock settings, weight settings, springs, tires, miscellaneous settings, and gear settings. Now, some things that I want to point out on here. I'm not going to go through what each and everything does individually. If that's something you guys would like to see a video on, let me know in the comments, and I'll be happy to do that. I'm by no means an expert in this, but this is where I want to give you a little bit of a background about where I'm coming from in this game because I feel like that's important. All right, for me, I got my start way back with the Papyrus games, NASCAR Racing 4, NASCAR Racing 2002, and then, of course, the one that so many of us sim racers are familiar with as the king is NASCAR Racing 2003. Of course, that is until iRacing picked up and has taken it from there. So I'm very familiar with all those, and that's what I've cut my teeth doing and been playing those forever, it seems. Well, if any of you who have played NASCAR Racing 2003 may remember some of the add-on tracks, the BR tracks, Talladega BR, Daytona BR, and etc. Well, I did those tracks. The B in BR stands for Brian, which is my name. So I did those tracks because I love the game, but I felt like it was missing a very important part in the competition, the ability to run the middle and upper lanes at the various tracks. So I created those tracks for that very purpose. I also did some work with the AI to try to get them from simply just hugging the bottom around every track in the corner. So that was, effective at various different levels, and that was great. Well, then after that, I moved on to R Factor, and if any of you guys are familiar with the US Pits stock car mod, I did the physics for that mod. So this is an area that I have a great deal of passion about. I don't claim to be a physicist. I don't claim to be, an engineer or aerodynamicist or anything like that. I'm simply somebody who has a very intense passion for racing and these cars. It's something that I love. So for these settings, they'll mean something different to me than they mean for the game. And the reason I say that is this. This game is a very simplified version of physics from what I can gather. For those of you who race iRacing on a normal basis, or have even run R Factor 2 and some of the stock car stuff there, regardless of what your opinion is, you'll notice that there are some things missing here in this screen. There are some things that are very different in how they affect the car. The biggest thing is, things that are extremely common and in fact mandatory in today's modern NASCAR racing, things like coil binding that was popular for so long. You had to figure that out, how to coil bind, which spring are you going to coil bind, all that kind of thing. Now it's moved into bump stops. Everything is in an effort to set up the ideal aerodynamic platform to obtain the most downforce and maintain drag and side force and all that kind of thing. Well, you're not going to find that stuff here. From what I've seen so far in the game, none of that stuff is really applicable, which is both good and bad. It's bad if you're a hardcore sim racer who's looking for that experience, then you're not going to get that in this game. It's good if you're just looking to have some fun, which is where I fall on this game. I'm not looking for this game to be a hardcore sim racing game. I want this game to just give me some single player fun and possibly some multiplayer fun as well. So the shock settings in the game, I really wouldn't go much above 10 on anything. Reason being, the bumps in this game they'll probably make you sick from the visuals if you crank that thing up to the max. Now let's take a look at that. If you see here, we can go all the way up to 24. If you go up to 24 on these settings, it will probably chatter your eyeballs out from the vibration. So the setting does work, but let's don't get too carried away on getting excessive with that, trying to, where you might say the bump, use really soft bump settings and really stiff rebound settings to try to hold the front end of the car down, anything like that. Probably not a good idea here. You can do it, but probably not the best idea just because of all the vibration it's going to have. The weight settings, left weight, on basically anything but a road course, you're going to want to max out the left weight, which you can see they've already done in the game. Front weight, I was surprised. They let you get by with a lot less front weight than I would have thought. Generally, that was a NASCAR 2003 thing where you would just throw a lot of rear weight in the car. That was a particular type of setup. You could throw a lot of rear weight in it and really hang the car out and get a lot of speed that way. You're going to have wedge to play around with. Essentially, if you're not familiar with wedge, then increase this number to make the car tighter, decrease it to make it looser. There's more to it than that, but that's the general idea. Overall, that's probably not the first thing I would choose to mess around with. All right, your front ride height and rear ride height. For those of you who are experienced sim racers, you'll notice there is no left front ride height, right front ride height, left rear, right rear. None of that exists. So it's a very simplified system. If you move over to springs, there's not going to be any coil binding and bump stops, anything available here. And it was interesting to me that the default setting is what is called around where I live, which is in Tennessee in the South, is known as hillbilly. And hillbilly is where you run a stiffer left front spring than a right front spring, which is what they've shown here by default. So I had a good chuckle out of that. Rear springs, again, are very soft, and so not a lot going on there. Again, things are pretty basic here. I was kind of surprised at the low temperatures that you see, or low pressures rather, that you see on the right sides. I mean, 33 and 32, much lower than I would have expected out of this, but it's a game, you work with it. Under the miscellaneous settings, camber, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff using high camber numbers and the sway bar numbers. Well, for me, from the background I have and the experience I have, I was expecting to see some huge front sway bars. Anything from mid to upper 2 inch range up to about a 3-inch range, something like that, trying to get the front end to be level and not tip over in the corners. Again, you don't really find that stuff here. You've also got a rear sway bar, which you can use. You got a track bar, and then some of the other basic type things. I was surprised to see a steering offset in this particular game, given some of the other sim aspects that it leaves out. And a steering offset enables you to try to offset the pull to the left that the car is going to have by offsetting the steering somewhat to the right. Some people like it, some people don't. So it's an optional type thing that you may or may not want to use, but it's there. And then the gear settings, nothing really surprising here. You can set your individual gears, although for the most part you can just leave these alone unless you're more advanced and really want to get into tweaking things. All right, so I'm going to discard the setups here. Let's talk a little bit about the graphics before I get in and actually start racing. The graphics in this game, if you're looking for something that resembles Forza or Project Cars, anything like that, you're going to be disappointed. It's okay, but it's not anything that's going to knock your socks off. I would just bypass some. Some of the textures don't look particularly good. Oh, but overall, it's just sort of so-so. Nothing really to point out as amazing or anything in that area. Sound. I have, for the purpose of this recording, I've turned the sound in game way down. The sounds are very loud, and one of the problems I do have with the game is that it doesn't give you the ability to separate the sounds. The sounds that you're going to hear is mostly your engine. The engine sound overpowers really everything else. And you might think, okay, what else do you need to hear? Well, in a game like this, where there's force feedback, the force feedback is hit or miss. It's okay, but it's not really that great at giving me feedback to what the car is doing at any particular time, so I need to hear the tires. So it would be great for me if I could turn down the sound of the engine so that I could hear the tires better. So that type of thing. Also the spotter. There's a spotter in game, but it's iffy at best. I find that the spotter will say something like "still there," and unless you are really paying attention to what's going on around you, you may not know if he means high or low. So you might be in the middle of 3 wide, and he's saying "still there." Well, you don't even know where they are. Are you in 3 wide? Are you on the top? Are you on the bottom? What? So they're not quite as chatty as I would prefer, because which sort of brings us into a discussion of the AI, which is when I'm going to go ahead and get inside the car. Now, for the purposes of the game, you have some different options available as to where you want to drive. If you want to drive into follow view, which is what this is, if you want to race inside the car, or if you want to get on the roof. Well, I want to get inside the car. So let's get inside this car, put it in first, and now they've put me in a terrible position. See, as you can see right there, I'm going to have a hard time just getting out of the pits. I basically have to crank that thing way up. All right. So now that I've shown you that, let's try that again. Okay, so it starts up. We're in first gear, and I'm going to try to get out of here. The AI are hit or miss. Overall, I would say they're okay. All right, let's work our way out onto the track here. I'm going to keep it fairly slow because I'm not the best at trying to talk while I'm navigating around the track. All right, so we've made our way into fourth gear. We're around the track. You can see it's already pretty bumpy, and I'm not using aggressive shock settings. So keep that in mind as you're tuning on your car. All right, so here's the best way I can describe AI for you. When you're dealing with a small group of them, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that, they can be really fun to race against. But at large packs like you're going to get at the restrictor plate tracks or at the beginning of a race anywhere, they can be very problem causing, simply because when you get them in big packs, as aggressive as they are, they don't give you any room, and they tend to beat and bang on you quite a bit. All right, so I find myself spending a lot of time on the high side simply because they generally try to take the low line as much as they can.
Still there.
All right, as you can see, when I encounter these guys one at a time, it's really not that big a deal, and they will fight you. Right now, I've got the AI running at 100%. I'm not using the adaptive AI and letting them adapt to me. I've got them on 100%, and as you can see, I'm able to run them down during a practice session here. And in fact, this is where I have the most fun because I encounter smaller numbers of them at one time. And I mentioned in a previous video about the career mode that I would advise you, if at all possible, to run a little bit longer races in career mode, simply because for the first 4, 5, 6 laps of a race, in general, the AI are going to be all clumped together. All right, you're going to get the start of the race, and of course you start too wide, but you're going to get where they're stuck too wide for several rows deep, and then even beyond that, several laps into the race, they're still too wide. But if you'll give a race, 8 to 10 laps, generally they'll be single file and strung out enough that you can actually manage to do some passing without worrying about going 3 wide in every corner and hitting them. Collisions with the AI, I don't have any, so far I don't have any experience in multiplayer, so I can't speak to that. But the experience with contacting another AI, whether they're hitting you or you're hitting them, it's almost like a trampoline effect. You hit them and it's like it just jolts your car and sends you off pretty violently. Now, that goes for the most part. One thing I can tell you that seems odd to me is that whenever I am running against the AI and I hit them from directly behind, like if, let's say you were bump drafting on a plate track or something like that, if that's the case, then it seems almost deadened, almost a very muted response, almost like it's doing nothing. And to give you an example of what I mean by that, other than a plate track, I was running a race in career mode at Texas. And we were coming down to the last couple of laps, and it was too wide, a lot of too wide, and I was having trouble finding an area to pass. Well, I came up behind a car. In this case, I think it was actually Larson. I came up behind the 42 car, and I was shoving him down the straightaway. All right, he was weaving back and forth, so I couldn't pass him, but I was basically shoving him down the straightaway. And then through the corner, I found that they were getting off the corner a lot worse than I was. So I was basically shoving him off the corner, but it was having no effect on his car and wasn't having any detrimental effect on my car either. So I just continued to do it through the end of the race, and we picked up some positions doing that. So that part wasn't great to see. But, it kind of is what it is with regards to that. So as you can see here in the practice session, the handling of the car, the force feedback, it's not bad. It's not I'm not going to say it's the best in the world, and you're not feeling every bump and all that kind of stuff. But in general, it does an okay job of letting you know what the car is doing. I've been able to change some setup options and really get the car very loose, change some other options, make the car very tight. So there is some adjustability there to get the car to feel the way you want. And, so overall, it's not terribly bad. There does seem to be a lot of tire fall off over the course of a run. You're going to lose several tenths. So that's also a good thing. All right, let's head back to pit road. So as you can see, the AI, overall, I was able to, I didn't have any real fights with them where we were struggling for positions back and forth. I've had some of those, and I can tell you, they were enjoyable. And it was tense because they don't give you a lot of room and they fight you hard. So I did like that part, as long as you can keep them keep them spread out and don't get too large of a pack together. All right, let's talk about some other parts of the game. We've talked about graphics. We've talked about sound. All right, we've talked about AI. We've talked a little bit about how the car feels and some of the adjustments that you can make in the garage. Now, let's move on to some things that I think are missing from the game. Number one, you have no ability to paint cars. As you're probably familiar, if you played a bunch of other racing simulations, one of the big things to do is to really paint your car, put various decals on it, arrange things how you want, do different paint schemes and that kind of thing. So you can't do that in this game. I'm guessing a lot of that has to do with the fact that they have some DLC options, both that are out available now, as well as some that are coming in the future that they're going to be charging for. And of course, that would really hurt their business if people are painting these things, putting them in the game, and sharing them. They wouldn't need to pay for the DLC. So I'm assuming that has something to do with it. The spotter. I mentioned earlier, they're not quite chatty enough for me. I want to have more information. They show you the lap time in the game. It'll pop up on the screen as you complete each lap. But I want to hear that kind of thing from the spotter. Not only who's inside or outside of me, but I also want to hear him telling me my lap times, just different things like that we've seen from other games. So this is not really anything new. I mentioned earlier the separate volume for, why not separate the volume so that I can turn down the volume of my engine so that I can hear my tires and or spotter better, that kind of thing. Also, some other things that I don't think it does a good job of communicating to you is the feedback of the car in general. I know I had tried some things on a setup one time and ended up getting a good laugh out of it because as I was going around the track, the car felt a little weird, but I couldn't figure out what it was because the changes I had made really weren't that drastic. And just to let you know, I was changing rear springs. I was trying to see how the car would react to some severe splits in rear springs, like running, say, a 200 left rear and a 600 right rear or an 800 right rear or whatever. I wanted to see what that would do. Well, as well as running two very soft rear springs. Well, it turns out the reason why the car was feeling so weird is because the rear of the car was dragging through most of the corner. Well, it seemed odd to me that I had no way of knowing that. There was nothing about the feel of the car that really told me it was dragging. It just felt a little weird. And it wasn't until I changed views going around the track that I finally figured out, oh, that's what it's doing. So, yeah, because I saw some sparks coming out the rear, but there was no way for me to know that otherwise. Again, it's some just basic things like that we're used to seeing in racing games and have been seeing for years. All the way back to the Papyrus games of NASCAR, 2003. We're used to seeing those things, and they're just not here. So my overall impression of the game is it can be fun. It's if you're going into this game expecting that it's going to be the successor to NASCAR Racing 2003, that this is going to be the reason why you no longer have to spend hours upon hours upon hours working on setups in iRacing, that you can just use this instead. No, it's not going to be those things to you. What I do think it can be is it can be a lot of fun if you play it for what it is. It's going to have its frustrating moments with the sounds and with the AI and with some of the options that simply aren't here, like setups. Why can't I save multiple setups for each track? Why can't I, other than the option of a race setup and a qualify setup? My qualifying setup, I can't even take my race setup, copy it over to my baseline qualifying setup, and then make adjustments from there. Can't do that. So I can't do a lot of things with setups, and that's worrisome for me also. But for the most part, I would say that if you approach the game for what it is instead of what it isn't, then you can have fun. But there's no doubt that it's missing a lot of features that we've all come to expect from racing sim. So I plan on continuing to play this game, and I'm going to be putting out some videos. Right now, I plan to do some career type videos where I show the different races that I'm in and some of the action and some of the tendencies of the AI from that perspective. I'm also planning to do some videos where I choose a track and just do a race session that way. So I've got some things planned, but if you guys have any suggestions on things you'd like to see, videos you'd like to see, or maybe any other tutorials on setups or whatever, just let me know in the comments, and I'm happy to help in any way I can. Hopefully you find these videos informative and somewhat entertaining. Just let me know what you'd like to see, and I'd be happy to do some further videos for you guys. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time on more Knee Pit Gaming videos.